Welcome to Product Momentum, a community of thought leaders and learners coming together to celebrate the product people who are shaping our way ahead. Inspired by our most pressing questions and insightful guests, we'll explore the challenges you face and offer practical, hands-on guidance your team can implement today. This is Product Momentum. Here are your hosts, Sean Flaherty and Paul Gable.
Paul, what a great episode.
Zoia, was such a fun conversation. I think
It was a lot of fun.
The openness and vulnerability about the mistakes that she's made, I think, really more power to her. I think the more open more of us were or are or could be,
the more we can learn from each other.
I think there's real power in those kinds of conversations. But change management was the main topic. We really kind of went far afield with a lot of interesting ideas. What was some of the top takeaways that you got out of that?
For me, it's the intersection of culture and innovation, and like really looking at the culture that you have and the culture that you want, and how much innovation you need, and how you define innovation. This is obviously a topic that's close to our hearts.
Yeah. And she hit on the idea of momentum, which obviously we're big fans of, but the idea that you can start to build change within your organization slowly, organically, naturally, but talking to people in the way that they need to be spoken to, I think it's a superpower.
And finding places to celebrate. Like, we know that's important.
Yeah.
So
great
episode.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah. Let's get after it.
Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of Product Momentum. We're here joined today by Zoia Kozakov. We are really excited by the content you just shared and want to dig a little bit deeper into it.
Let's do it.
Before we jump in, can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, what got you here today for those who haven't encountered you before?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of what you do and your podcast, and always good to link up with fellow podcasters. So in my day job, I head up device digital wallets at JPMorgan Chase. In a non-fancy way of saying that is basically your Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, and using your Chase cards in that.
Yep.
I've been in product for about 5 years. Also done pre-seed stage companies and then another financial institution. And today I was really excited to talk about change management because I think a lot of the times we focus on our wins, and I enjoy talking about many of my failures today.
Well, I think, humbling to see someone so open and vulnerable sharing some of those stories. I actually want to start with a question that came at the end of your talk about momentum, and we're obviously fans of momentum. We named our podcast after it.
Yes.
The idea of pre-wiring conversations and capitalizing on wins, big and small, and as you're navigating through these, you're essentially moving people's cheese. You're taking something that is comfortable and safe and presenting an opportunity to excel, but also open yourself up to the possibility of failure. And capitalizing on this idea of momentum and building that into the conversations you're having in organizations, how can product managers start to become change agents in the midst of this evolution within their orgs?
For sure. So I think one thing that I probably should have started my talk with is that change is hard, especially if that change is actually moving the needle. I did touch on this a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think the notion of momentum is, when we set out to create a change, we think it's going to succeed. And that's all very positive. As you actually get to the execution, it gets harder and harder and harder. So I view momentum and building out continuous wins as a way to keep everybody well-spirited, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, I think that goes back to, what's going to keep you well-spirited versus you versus me is going to be very different.
Yep.
Which is why I really make sure that you start with figuring out what the goals of the other people are, and then you create wins that cater to their momentum and what is needed to enable that.
Because product management is like the art of change management.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we do. Like,
For
everything. We're constantly trying to adapt to the market. We've got teams that are changing and shifting often underneath us. Like, we've got all sorts of engineering practices that are changing on the fly, and new tools are becoming available. It's change management.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's pretty spectacular, ever-changing environment. So this concept of small wins and momentum, what you're calling momentum, I think is really powerful.
Thank you.
What do you see as like symptoms that teams experience when they don't have momentum?
I think there's a couple of different things. It's also just about how people deal with challenges.
Yep.
I think the worst one is actually disassociation, because a lot of the times people think when you have somebody in a meeting derailing you, that person can become the villain of the change management effort. I actually think the villain of the change management effort is the one who says, yep, great,
wow,
or doesn't speak up at all.
Oh yeah, the puffer fish.
Yeah. And then basically you walk away being like, do you have anything to say to me? Do you have any ideas? And they don't. And so I think a symptom, disassociation to me is the worst one. Apathy. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that the scary thing about the loud person in the room is that they can flip the believers to being non-believers, which is why, again, I overcapitalize on the continuous pre-meeting before the meeting.
Yep.
Because again, you can preempt that person for blowing up your meeting. If you call out like, oh, we know XYZ may be a risk. Here's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, you also spend a lot of energy in your talk talking about vision and the importance of vision and having a clearly articulated vision that people even can sign up for.
Right.
Because if you don't have that starting point, I think it's very hard to get people aligned.
Yeah. And you lose sight of where are we even going.
Yeah. And you run the risk of having to delve into organizational politics to kind of maneuver around but if you have a good vision and everybody's agreeing with it, it's easier to get people rowing the boat in the same direction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we used to ask all the time on the podcast is, what is your definition of innovation? And it was fascinating getting so many different, to a person, every time we asked a question, we would get a different definition of innovation.
Pretty diverse set of answers. Like, what is innovation? It's wild.
And your notion of innovation culture fit clicked something into place for me that we were actually chatting about off camera a little bit earlier in the day, how it's just this oddity where people can have the same idea generally of what innovation means, but when you pin them to a definition, it's sometimes wildly disparate what ends up coming out and what's meaningful to people. And that's what I think you were getting at with innovation culture fit. My definition of innovation might be different than Sean's definition of innovation, but that doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It's really about how we express it, how we go through and perceive the world differently. I'm wondering if you for those who haven't heard this phrase that I think you coined, innovation culture fit, what does this mean to you? How do people start to place themselves on a map?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different things. They're product managers for different things that come in different stages.
Right.
I, as somebody who consider myself to be a little bit of a dreamer, believe that I want to be the person that comes to a company and works on that edge case project, on that wild investment. And even that looks very different at a different company.
For sure.
And very transparently, I found myself having this preconceived notion of what innovation was, which was let's fly to the moon on a rocket ship.
Right.
And then I would get to a company, say a financial services company, which says, we're not flying to the moon. That's not our idea of innovation.
Right.
We have many, many millions of customers, and this is their money. We can't be messing that up, right? And so then it's okay, the two things can happen. If I come in with a delusional idea of innovation, I might be banging my head against the wall because they're not interested.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And that's why for me, when people evaluate product culture fit, a term I wish I coined, but I didn't. And it's am I coming into a company that's going to value an engineering background or a design background? We should also be evaluating the innovation fit. So if you're fine to work on innovation process enhancement processes, then you should find that company. If you want to go build a rocket ship, there's some that do that too.
Yeah, there's a organizational psychologist named Robert Quinn who's done a lot of work on this concept of organizational culture in the context of innovation, really. He's got a 4-quadrant model that talks about customer focus versus R&D, internal focus, and flexibility versus structure.
Yes. I would say the other axis to add to what you're saying is also, again, what does success look like to you? Because some people can say, I'm good to do R&D for 2 years, launch nothing, and I feel like I worked in innovation, right? Yep. Some people are well, I want to launch something out of here. And so then they're fine to launch something that's maybe a little bit less out there, but launches. And it's a bunch of different axes of how you consider your career.
Yeah, and I also think there's room for a lot of that inside of an organization. And if you don't think of it that way, you just kind of have an ad hoc sort of culture. But I love this concept of being purposeful about thinking of innovation as an important cultural component. How does it fit in? What are we trying to do here? Yep. Do we need some big revolutionary things, or do we need small incremental innovations? And how are we going to organize our discussions and our thinking around how we're showing up for the market and how we're showing up for our people?
Yeah,
right.
I want to shift gears just a little bit outside of the four corners of your talk and highlight a little bit of the work that you do in the world, because you're bringing so many interesting conversations to your podcast.
Women in Innovation.
Women in Innovation, and you're coming up on or have passed 200 episodes now?
Yeah, I'm at like 120 or
Almost
something.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's, a lot of great conversations that I've listened to. I think there's a lot of room to grow in the conversations that you have. And I'm wondering if you could share maybe one or two favorite conversations that you've had that kind of stand out. I think you started in the middle of the pandemic and we're just kind of like dealing with some stuff. And while all of that was going on, you had a really clear voice and brought some really interesting conversations. What stands out in your memory as some of the favorite moments on your own podcast?
I appreciate that. I think, for me, starting my podcast was really solving a personal problem that gained momentum because other people were having this problem. As you said, I started it in the pandemic when my career was blowing up and like not in the good way and life was blowing up. And I thought to myself, like, what does the chief innovation officer at Citibank, what is she doing at this time? What is the chief innovation officer at the NBA doing at this time? And so some of the ones that I think are really interesting is actually Laura Tuckelmariam. She's, a part of the family, the New York Product Collective Product Conference and the industry family and Product Collectible and all of that. So she's fantastic. Also Cassidy Fine I had on my podcast as well. Some others actually. So Amy Brooks, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of the NBA. I'm honestly speaking not a big sports person. So I thought the idea of having her on was very cool, but I wasn't sure what I was going to take back from that conversation. Yeah. And I think my overall pitch for all of these different guests is we can all learn from each other's industries and problems. And I think that they're just fantastic guests that I've been blessed with.
That's so cool. I think Amy's was the first episode that I found you through.
Okay.
And have been following ever since. Yeah. So really cool stuff. I think, just taking that one level deeper, as you've been exploring this very out in the open and kind of sharing your journey, the content that you're focusing on is change management as you're going through change. So there's this meta sort of nexus of a lot of really cool things happening all at once. Can you share, a lot of product managers find themselves adrift and with layoffs on a lot of folks' horizons and a lot of uncertainty. How can people take this and use it for a power for good? How can they take change management and turn it into a superpower if maybe they haven't dialed that into a tool in their toolbox yet?
Yeah. So, everything is a mindset consideration. I think one thing I will say is a lot of the times, you get a job. Hopefully you're passionate about it. Hopefully you're good at it. I think it's Scott Galloway that talks about like the Venn diagram of those two things. And then you kind of get into this place and you're comfortable. Maybe you're growing, maybe you're not. And then the world comes crashing down on you, whether it's because your change management effort failed or because you got fired. And I think that what happens is that it opens up, it brings you back to basically square one in a sense, where you start asking yourselves the fundamental questions. Again, was this actually the kind of company that I want to work on? Am I still in this industry because I have experience in it or because I like the industry? Do I want to work at a big company or a small company? So I think obviously, hopefully everybody keeps their jobs and all the stability in the world. But I think that it kind of takes off this veil that you've had over your eyes and it pushes you to other things. I think the other thing, and this goes back to the birth of my podcast, when I was in a moment of WTF is going on in the world and in my life, it forced me to be a problem solver. And that problem solving has led me to, like you said, almost 150 episodes, incredible guests, 40,000 downloads all over the world. Yeah. So see it as an opportunity.
Yeah. There you go. And I think the most important thing, one of the most important things for product leaders is to always be learning. Because, the environment is ever changing. Like, when do we stop hearing about some new concept and product?
And it's technology and industry and problem for sure.
Yeah, I think it was Robert Sapolsky defines evolution as the ability of a species to adapt when the environment changes. And we know the environment's ever changing. So we have to keep learning so that we become more and more adaptable.
Yeah. And that's why we shouldn't be afraid of change. It's obviously, it's natural to be, but I think you have two options. You either embrace it or you get left behind.
That's right.
So there's a product owner, a product manager, someone just starting out in the career listening to this episode right now, hearing you're all the way down the road and really, achieving this high level of visibility and success, helping so many people out. How can we start to encourage people who are dipping their toe into this field and just, it's attractive to many people who are generalists who maybe have an expertise, like you shared your expertise in shopping and having a credit card. They maybe have an expertise in, some field or discipline. I wonder, and sometimes I'll be honest, I worry that we place an emphasis on you have to be a domain expert in the product that you're building. Just curious if you could respond to that in light of where we've been in change management. Does a product manager need to develop that domain expertise, or is product management a skill in a vacuum? And this is obviously a rhetorical question.
No, but I think there's a couple of things. I think if you don't have a domain, again, it's neither a good or a bad thing. The question is, what do you have?
Right.
So for some people, it is domain. And I do say, like, there are some people I speak to, especially in financial services, they've done true finance their whole lives. And they're like, oh, I want to be a product manager now. Like, your best bet is actually to be a product manager in a financial services, finance-oriented field, right? So that can be a superpower in and of itself. Now, that being said, if you don't have the domain expertise, for me, I've always focused on, like, what are the skill sets that I have and the experiences. So for example, for me, having the design skills, even though I abuse them, as I talked about in my talk, having those design skills was something that I kind of used as my superpower. And so I think, again, it goes back to, I think this is a career that actually pushes you to self-reflect a lot at every stage. I think nothing is a given. Just because you were a product manager in one company doesn't mean that you're going to get the next opportunity. So I think it's about self-reflection and, like, figuring out what is your secret sauce.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that perspective.
Well, thank you for joining us. This has been a great episode, and it was really fun watching your talk here at New York Product Collective.
Yeah. Before we let you go, how can people find you if they haven't encountered your podcast yet, or the things that you write and talk about? What's the best place to track you down and learn from what you're sharing in the world?
I appreciate it. I am a big fan of LinkedIn. I think it's a great space to connect with people. So my LinkedIn is linkedin.com/in/Zoia. So hopefully not too hard to find. My podcast is Women in Innovation. And I have a Substack too, which I dabble in writing. So it's called Product Box. So you can find me on all of the things.
Thank you for sharing what you're sharing. You're making the world a better place by doing it. And we really appreciate the time that you took to come and chat with us today. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today. In line with our goals of transparency and listening, we really want to hear from you. Sean and I are committed to reading every piece of feedback that we get, so please leave a comment or a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. Not only does it help us continue to improve, but it also helps the show climb up the rankings so that we can help other listeners move, touch, and inspire the world just like you're doing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next episode.